My boss fired me for stealing, so I took down his entire scam. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't? That's exactly what happened to me. And if my former boss had just fired me normally, I probably would have moved on with my life instead. He accused me of stealing in front of the entire office. That one decision ended up destroying his own career. So, for some context, I'm 29, and at the time I worked as an inventory coordinator for a mid-sized electronics distributor. We supplied everything from laptops to security cameras for businesses around the city, nothing glamorous. But I genuinely liked the job, the team was great, the pay was decent. And after almost 5 years there, everyone knew I was the person who double-checked everything. If a shipment looked off, people came to me. If inventory numbers didn't match, I stayed late until they did. My coworkers even joked that I trusted spreadsheets more than people, honestly. They weren't wrong. Then, about 8 months before everything happened, we got a new operations manager. I'll call him Mark. The moment he walked into the office, you could tell he wanted everyone to know he was in charge. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rude, at least not at first. He just had this way of talking to people that made every conversation feel like an interview. If you suggested an idea, he'd say, "Interesting." Then repeat the exact same idea 5 minutes later like it was his own, if someone made a tiny mistake. He'd turn it into a 20-minute lecture about professionalism. Within a month, the entire office had changed. People stopped joking. Lunch breaks got quieter. Nobody wanted to ask questions anymore because Mark somehow made everything feel like a test. Still, I stayed out of it. My philosophy has always been simple. Do your job, go home. Don't get involved in office politics. I wish I'd followed that advice. Around 3 months after Mark arrived, strange things started happening. Inventory counts didn't match. At first, it was small: one missing laptop, two missing tablets, a box of wireless headphones that somehow vanished. Everyone assumed it was simple human error, wrong barcode, shipping mistake. Someone forgot to scan a package, it happens. So nobody thought much about it, except me. Because the numbers didn't make sense. The missing products weren't random. They were always expensive items, never charging cables, never keyboards, always high-value electronics. I mentioned it during a meeting. Mark immediately cut me off. It's probably just counting mistakes. Then he smiled. Let's not create problems where there aren't any. Something about the way he said it bothered me, but I dropped it. A week later, another shipment disappeared. This time it was 6 premium laptops, worth thousands. Everyone spent hours searching the warehouse. Nothing. No damaged boxes. No paperwork errors, just gone. Mark called an emergency staff meeting. He looked furious. He started talking about trust, company values, responsibility. Then he announced that someone inside the warehouse had to be stealing. You could feel the room go completely silent. Nobody looked at each other. Everyone just stared at the floor. The next few weeks were miserable. Random locker inspections, security reminders, managers watching employees more closely than ever. Felt like every single person was suddenly a suspect. Then came Friday, the day everything changed. Around 3 in the afternoon, Mark walked over to my desk. His expression was impossible to read. "Can you come to my office for a minute?" I honestly thought it was another inventory meeting instead. The moment I walked in, I noticed someone from Human Resources already sitting there. My stomach dropped. Mark folded his hands. "There seems to be a serious issue." Before I could ask what he meant, he slid a printed document across the desk. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Inventory Loss Investigation." I looked up, completely confused. Mark leaned back in his chair. "We've reviewed warehouse records. Your employee ID appears in multiple missing inventory transactions." For a second, I genuinely thought he was joking. I laughed. Nobody else did. I looked at the report. There were dozens of inventory logs with my employee number attached. The problem: I had never processed most of them. I pointed that out immediately. "There has to be a mistake." Mark simply replied, "So you're denying it?" "Denying what?" "Stealing company property." Room went completely silent. I couldn't even process what I had just heard. I remember saying, "You seriously think I stole from the company I've worked for 5 years?" Mark didn't even hesitate. "Evidence speaks for itself." I asked to see security footage. He said it wasn't necessary. I asked who investigated the records. He refused to answer. I asked if anyone had actually seen me take anything. Again, no answer. Instead, he reached into a folder, pulled out a termination letter, and slid it across the desk. Just like that, 5 years of hard work gone. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I packed my desk, word spread through the office. People stopped talking when I walked by. Some coworkers wouldn't even look me in the eye. One person quietly whispered, I can't believe you'd risk everything." That hurt more than losing the job because they actually believed it. Security escorted me to the parking lot as I reached my car. I turned around one last time. Mark was standing at the front window, watching me leave. He smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind of smile someone gives when they think they've won. At that moment, I thought my career was over. What I didn't know was that Mark had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because the one thing he forgot was that inventory systems keep records, and I had spent 5 years learning exactly how those records worked. I wasn't planning revenge, I just wanted to clear my name. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't about a few missing laptops. It was something much, much bigger. The first few days after getting fired were honestly the hardest. I barely left my apartment. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was someone from work saying there had been a mistake instead. It was mostly friends asking, "So, what really happened?" That question hurt every single time, because no matter how many times I said I was innocent, I knew how it sounded. Companies don't usually fire employees without a reason. At least that's what people assume. By the fourth day, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I opened my laptop if I couldn't get my job back. The least I could do was prove I wasn't responsible. Luckily, I had one advantage. During my 5 years there, I'd helped set up part of the inventory tracking system, not the software itself. But the procedures. Every product movement created a digital trail. Every scan, every adjustment, every login, every timestamp. You couldn't simply make expensive inventory disappear without leaving footprints, unless someone knew exactly which footprints to erase. That's when something clicked. The report Mark showed me only contained my employee ID. It didn't include login times. It didn't include workstation numbers. It didn't include approval records. Why? Because those details would have raised questions. I still had copies of old training manuals and workflow documents saved in my personal files. Nothing confidential. Just materials I'd created for new employees over the years. As I reviewed them, I remembered something interesting. Every inventory adjustment required two things: an employee ID and a manager approval. That second part had been completely missing from the report. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything I remembered. Every shipment that had mysteriously disappeared, every emergency meeting, every time Mark had dismissed concerns. Then another memory hit me. About 2 months before I was fired, one of my coworkers, I'll call him Alex, had quietly mentioned something during lunch. He'd said, "Funny how missing products always get discovered after Mark works late." At the time, we laughed it off now. It didn't seem funny anymore. I decided to call Alex. I wasn't even sure he'd answer. After all, everyone probably thought I was guilty, to my surprise. He picked up almost immediately. The first thing he said was, "I don't think you did it." I didn't even know what to say. He continued. Something never felt right. For nearly an hour, we talked. Carefully, neither of us wanted to jump to conclusions. Then Alex mentioned something I'd completely forgotten. About 6 weeks before I was fired, Mark had changed warehouse procedures. Only managers could approve inventory corrections now. At the time, everyone thought it was just another unnecessary rule. Now, it sounded a lot more convenient. Alex lowered his voice. "I probably shouldn't tell you this. After you left, things started disappearing again." I froze. "Guess whose employee ID showed up this time?" I waited, he sighed. "Mine," for a few seconds. Neither of us spoke, then he quietly added, "I haven't been fired yet. I think they're building a case." That's when I realized. I hadn't been singled out, I was just the first. Someone was creating fake evidence against employees one at a time. But why if products were disappearing? Why blame random staff instead of finding the real problem unless the real problem was the person running the investigation? The next morning, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Something told me to answer. "Hello," a calm voice replied. "Hi, this is Jennifer from Human Resources." My heart immediately started pounding. She sounded nervous, not angry, not accusing. Nervous. She asked if we could meet somewhere outside the office, a public coffee shop. She said she couldn't explain over the phone. I almost said no, then she quietly added, "I think you deserve to know something." An hour later, we were sitting in opposite corners of a nearly empty cafe. Jennifer kept looking over her shoulder before speaking. Finally, she leaned in. "I wasn't supposed to say this. The report you were shown wasn't the original version." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "The first report listed multiple employee IDs. It also included manager approvals. Before your meeting, Mark personally replaced it. I felt my stomach drop. So, he changed the investigation, she nodded slowly. I questioned it. Told me not to worry about it. Then she reached into her bag. I made a copy. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I unfolded it carefully, within seconds. I spotted something Mark had desperately tried to hide. Right beside nearly every missing shipment was the same approval code. Manager authorization. M204 Mark's authorization. I looked back at Jennifer. She simply said, I think someone is blaming the wrong people. At that moment, everything changed. This wasn't just about proving I was innocent anymore, for the first time. I had evidence that someone inside the company had been rewriting the story, and if Mark was willing to alter official reports, I couldn't help but wonder. What else had he been hiding? I left that coffee shop with one thought repeating in my head. Don't rush this. If I marched into the office waving a photocopy around, Mark would have plenty of time to come up with another explanation. I needed something he couldn't talk his way out of. Over the next week, Alex kept me updated. Almost every evening, he'd send me a quick message. Another inventory adjustment today. Mark stayed late again. Nobody else was in the warehouse. Pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Then something unexpected happened. One of my old coworkers texted me out of the blue. "Owe you an apology." I asked why. She replied, "I didn't believe you at first. Now they're saying I'm responsible for missing equipment too." That made 3 employees, 3 different people, 3 different accusations, the only thing they all had in common. Mark. It suddenly became obvious. If enough employees were blamed, nobody would notice there was only one person connecting every case. A few days later, Jennifer called again. This time she sounded much more serious. Holding another investigation meeting tomorrow. For Alex. I immediately understood what that meant if nothing changed. Alex would probably be fired just like I was. I asked her, does upper management know what's happening? She hesitated. I don't think they know the full story. That gave me an idea. Our company had regional directors who rarely visited the warehouse. They only stepped in when something major happened, if they saw the real evidence before Mark could change it. Everything could change. Jennifer agreed to help. Alex agreed too. The 3 of us spent that entire night putting together a timeline. Every missing shipment, every suspicious inventory adjustment, every approval code, every employee who had been blamed. When we finished, one thing stood out immediately. Every single missing item had been approved under the exact same manager authorization, Mark's. There wasn't a single exception. The next morning, regional management arrived for Alex's meeting. Mark walked into the conference room looking completely confident. He probably thought this was just another routine termination. Alex sat quietly at one end of the table. Jennifer sat near the HR representative. I wasn't supposed to be there, but 15 minutes into the meeting, the regional director asked an unexpected question. Has anyone reviewed the approval history? The room went silent. Mark answered almost instantly. That isn't relevant. Director frowned. I'd still like to see it. Mark's confidence slipped for the first time. Files aren't available at the moment. Jennifer calmly placed a folder on the table. I believe these are the records you're looking for. Every head turned toward her. Mark's face completely changed. The regional director opened the folder for nearly 2 minutes. Nobody spoke, page after page. He compared dates, approval logs, employee IDs, warehouse reports. Finally, he looked directly at Mark. Can you explain why your authorization appears on nearly every missing shipment? Mark opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. It's part of my job. Director nodded. Approving shipments is. Approving inventory that later disappears is not. Atmosphere in the room shifted instantly for the first time. Mark looked nervous, really nervous. He started blaming software errors, then warehouse staff, then outdated systems, but every explanation created another contradiction. Eventually, the director quietly closed the folder. I think this investigation is over. Alex's investigation, Mark's. Security was asked to escort him from the building while a full audit was launched. As he walked past the conference room, he glanced at me. The same person he had publicly accused, the same employee he smiled at while I was escorted out weeks earlier. This time, he wasn't smiling. Neither was I, because clearing my name wasn't about getting revenge. It was about getting the truth back. And after weeks of believing my career was ruined, that truth was finally catching up to the person who had been hiding it all along. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the company president. And the first thing he said completely caught me off guard. Think we owe you a very serious apology. For a second, I honestly thought it was a prank. The company president had never called me before. In fact, I'd only met him twice in 5 years. Both times were during holiday events where he shook everyone's hand and gave a short speech. So hearing his voice on the phone felt surreal. He didn't waste any time. Reviewed everything. I'd like to meet with you if you're willing. I agreed. The next morning, I walked back into the same building I'd been escorted out of just a few weeks earlier. It felt strange. Some of the employees looked surprised to see me. A few gave me small smiles, others looked embarrassed. No one said anything. The president met me in a conference room. This time, there was no HR representative, no security, just him. The first thing he did was stand up and shake my hand. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "We failed you." "I'm sorry you feel that way. There was a misunderstanding. Just, we failed you." He explained that after Mark was removed, an independent audit had been completed. The results were far worse than anyone expected. The missing electronics weren't random losses. They had been disappearing for months. Inventory records had been altered. Reports had been edited. Several employees, including me, had been blamed using incomplete documentation. The audit also found that some products listed as damaged had never actually been damaged at all. Everything had been hidden behind paperwork that most people never questioned. The president looked genuinely disappointed. Internal controls clearly weren't strong enough. He then slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a formal letter clearing my employment record. It stated that my termination had been reversed and that the accusations against me were unsupported. Seeing those words in writing, I can't even explain the relief I felt. For weeks, I'd wondered whether future employers would think I had actually stolen something. Now I finally had proof that my name had been cleared. Then he asked, "We'd like to offer you your job back." I paused. A month earlier, I would have accepted without thinking. But now, everything felt different. I looked around that conference room and realized something, even though Mark had been the one responsible. The experience had changed how I viewed the company. I politely thanked him, then I said, "I appreciate the offer, but I think it's time for a fresh start." He nodded. "I understand." Before I left, he added one more thing. "If you ever need a professional reference, you'll have one." Few weeks later, I accepted a position at another company. During the interview, they asked why I had left my previous job. I decided to tell them the truth, not the dramatic version, just the facts. To my surprise, the hearing manager smiled and said, "I've actually heard about what happened." Apparently, news had spread through the industry much faster than I expected. He finished the interview with one sentence I'll never forget. "Integrity is hard to prove. It's impossible to fake forever." I got the job. A few months after that, Alex called me. He had been promoted. Jennifer had also received recognition for speaking up instead of staying quiet. As for Mark, I honestly don't know what happened after he left, and to be honest, I stopped caring, because somewhere along the way I realized something important. I started this whole journey trying to get revenge, but that's not what I ended up getting. What I got back was my reputation. And that's worth a lot more. So if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this: the truth doesn't always come out immediately. Sometimes it takes patience, sometimes it takes courage, and sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to accept a lie.